Namaste and greetings. We are live on episode 83 of my show, Manage Better. Uh, of all of you and me included, I never thought that we will get to 83, but here we are on a very long journey, which started with a hobby just to say, okay, what do we do during the pandemic? We can maybe educate others and we can share some knowledge and the likes. During that period, during the last 2, 3 years, I have gravitated towards a topic which is now pretty much my mission statement in a way. I do want to uh, take a lot of knowledge that is available to the mid-career professionals. So, what is mid-career? Essentially, people who are not in the early career and not in the late career or not senior executives. All of that is middle management, mid-career. I did realize over the years, and many of you know this part, that I did realize that the a lot of help is available to senior executives, a lot of help is available to early career executives, but not much is available to the mid career people. And that is where I have tried to pitch my work, which is for mid career people. I of course have a full time job, but I do this on the side and try and bring people, authors, coaches, consultants, trainers who are working in that space to share their knowledge and wisdom. And today we have one such fantastic speaker with us. I'll introduce very quickly. Uh, but the reason why he's here is because he, along with his co-authors, has written a book which I wished I could actually write a chapter in. So the book is about middle management and the power of middle management, which is my favorite topic that I have believed for long that middle management is what makes or breaks an organization. They execute the plans that are put in place, and this is often ignored. So that's the core topic for today. Thank you for joining. Those who've joined on LinkedIn or YouTube, do let me know if you can see me well, hear me well. I apologize for the view. This is the best you get at 51, but hopefully you can hear me well. And yeah, keep. I'll request you in some time to bring your questions in, because like all previous episodes, you can ask your questions during the show. So let me bring in Bill, and Bill Scheninger is an international speaker, author, researcher, advisor to senior executives. Like I said, this is not why he's here. He's here because he's written this fantastic or co-written this fantastic book, which we'll speak about. He's currently the senior partner at Modern Executive Solutions and has been a senior partner emeritus at McKinsey for several years. So let me welcome. Hi, good morning to you, and thank you for doing this, Bill. And it's a pleasure to speak to somebody who truly believes in the power of middle management. I will unmute you so that we can hear you. Any opening comments, Bill? As you,
Well, that was
as,
a pretty good intro. It's I would say that your commitment to the topic might be a little atypical, right? I mean, I think 4 or 5 years ago, you didn't have a ton of people saying, "Let's talk with enthusiasm about the importance of middle management," right? But it's picked up some steam here in the last year and a half or so.
yeah, and in a way, your book, Bill, is very timely because the topic is right. The people are talking about this topic. People have, I would say, re-realized the importance of middle management, and that's where it comes in. And I actually started this series with mid-career topics. So it was not so much middle management; it was mid-career crisis or mid-career
Mhm.
blues. And the more I spoke about with people globally, and I realized that these are all synonymous things. Middle management has a lot of issues because they feel inertia, stagnation, they can't get things done, a lot of politics, those kind of things. So all of that is a big, humongous ball, and we will try and unpeel the onion with you in a bit. All set for your questions. I have some prepared some questions for you. We'll go through that, and then of course, as the show goes, we'll have questions from the audience. Okay. So first up, I think this is a question that I had in mind before I even approached you, Bill, and thank you once again for accepting to speak to us. My question was, everybody and everybody's neighbor wants to write about leadership. Nobody wants to write about middle management. It's a boring topic. Book won't sell. You may struggle to get a publisher. All of this did not happen to you. You, of course, have a fantastic publisher. You got the book out. It's doing well. Why write a book on middle management and not on the usual leadership topics?
Yeah, it's a good question. And certainly if you walk around in an airport and look at the stacks of books, you'd see exactly what you're saying, right? Which is everyone wants to talk about, leadership or change. I mean, just to tell you how I landed here, right? It was, I'm just turned 54. And so, I graduated high school in 87 and got out of undergraduate in the early 90s. So, I mean, I'm right in the wheelhouse of Gen X. And, in that era, and I thought I heard you maybe say you were 51, but I'm not sure, but you'll recognize these references. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, Gordon Gekko was supposed to be a slime ball in a movie, and he turned out to be an anti-hero that impacted people of our age, right? Greed is good, right? This is that idea. I think the 80s produced a series of moments in time, like in many cases, particularly in North America, our parents who were boomers would have believed in cradle to grave employment.
Yeah.
And that ended rather dramatically, right? Where I live in Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania, I live in a place called the Lehigh Valley, Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton. Bethlehem Steel went cold and stopped making steel. Mack Trucks moved away. Lucent just a decade later would lose virtually all of its value. I only say that because I think for many of us, there was such a sharp contrast between the idea of what organization life looked like and what it meant to be an esteemed member of one of these amazing institutions. I mean, you can remember if someone said, well, my dad's a vice president at IBM, or my dad's a vice president or a G, or my mom's a vice president, you thought, oh, wow, they've really made it.
Yeah.
But starting with the 80s and then rolling into the early 90s in terms of re-engineering, right-sizing, downsizing, the run-up to the dot-com era, where you first saw things like E-HR, and self-service. You had a run of Dilbert, the run of cartoons and pundits making fun of middle managers. It was basically the end of the Sloan era of thinking about replicable BUs. Conglomerates were getting broken up. All of this stuff came together to go, hey, these people in the middle, those roles, what are they there really for? They're a joke. They, that all they do is pass paper, literally pushing paper.
Yeah.
And so, when all those things came together, and in the 90s, you saw the transaction cost of communicating to a lot of people quickly through the web came online. There was a lot of people who rightly said, well, what do these people do? Why do they exist? And they became literally a caricature, like whether it's the movie Office Space and, and where's my TPS reports. So I only spin that because I think, I started paying attention to this 30 years ago. And I did not wake up and go, oh, I really want to be a middle manager. These are, but, over time, first in graduate school and then, in the 23 years at McKinsey, I fell prey to that trap. I mean, there's in the intro, very early in the intro, I wrote a couple of paragraphs about saying I was really, really good at cost cutting earlier in my career. And I felt like I'd gone too far in some cases where I was cavalier about making assumptions about the roles in the middle that probably could have just gone away. And I think I was wrong, honestly. It doesn't mean that there wasn't excess. There wasn't jobs that didn't matter. I just think, this broad swath of middle management is not useful. I regret it, full stop. And then winding it up, I promise. I still think you see coming out of the tech sector rather naive statements around not needing any middle managers. And I think the only people who say they don't need managers and you just need to give it to the, the artisanal coder are the people who really enjoy playing with other people's capital. Right. But, if you want to do that, start your own company. Right. But, you know what I mean? So the long wind up to over the course of my professional career, this has always been there. And then about 5 years ago, I started doing what was called future of work within McKinsey. And at that time, we were looking at what the impact of automation was going to be. Right. And so, like consultants, you break it up into, 3 chunks. What's changing in the work? What does that mean for the workforce? And then the commensurate impact on the workplace. Right as the height of we were doing that, COVID hits. right? And now you have like a lot of people can't come to work. A lot of people still go to work, but you're like, hey, well, what about the work is permanent? Like, are the big box retailers going to always keep part of their space now for forward deployed logistics and supply chain? Are we going to accept never giving an order to someone in a fast food place anymore? Will we really think that an iPad is a replacement for a sommelier? Things like that, right? Think about all the things. Just think about going to hotels and hotels go, hey, we're not going to clean your room anymore. What? And so when that was happening, every time we'd ask the question, well, how do we know what work's really changing? Well, clearly the person they work for knows. Well, hey, what did the employees learn during this period of time and learn about different ways of working? And what actually don't they need to know anymore? Well, clearly the person they work for knows that. Hey, people are struggling and wanting to come back to the office. What are we going to do about that? Well, the person they work for can probably do some things to get it back and make a community. The answer was always the same: middle management. The challenge was the problem was middle management, in that, after 30 years of being hammered with right sizing and spans and layers and downsizing and derision and rapidly moving out anybody who could possibly lead into other roles, we'd just eroded all the basic leadership and management skill in these roles and made it a way station to get out of quickly, not a place to be viewed as an esteemed and rather integral part of the company. So that was the genesis, right? And why I felt so passionate about saying, so many people are in these roles and so many employees desperately need to be led well. So why not do that?
I think that took me back a little bit, and we are the same generation, Bill, in many ways. Of course, I grew up in India, and I can tell you that I've pretty much seen the same. Of course, the stories and
right?
context can be different.
Yeah.
Absolutely the same. The stuff that you said about our parents, being in the same job their entire career, and suddenly people like us getting into the career, and we realized that middle management was not fashionable. Nobody wants to be in middle, and who gets all this stuff done? And that reminds me, you will know of this example, where Google about 20 years ago did this major study where they said that we don't need any managers. We can do without the managers. And Bill Campbell, the great Bill Campbell, came around and said that we do need, and stop this nonsense. And
that is just back. utter nonsense. I mean, the tech companies have done a lot of good for us, but the tech bros have come up with some really absurd things. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I know that. I work for one, so I know that.
Hey, if you believe that, I've got some crypto for you that's still valuable. But I digress.
Okay, cool. Just a quick reminder to our audience that Bill will take your questions. So the tough ones goes to him. I will take the easy ones, but we have some time. So keep the questions coming. So at some point we will get into your questions. So moving on a little bit, Bill, we got a broad idea about why you and your co-authors wanted to write this book and why it matters. And now getting a little deeper is the how is middle management, why is middle management so crucial to organizational success? Any examples you saw? Of course, you don't have to name people if you can't, but any examples you saw during your research? Why is this so crucial? I mean, philosophically we now know, but peeling the onion a little bit.
One of the things that hasn't changed, in fact, maybe it's gotten more profound, is the need for sense making for employees. How does what I do matter? Why should I do it? How does it fit in with what others are doing? Classic sense making. Where do I fit in? And at a time when employees, particularly now that we have, well, it's being reported that it's the most multi-generational of workforces ever. I have no idea if that's true or not. It feels that way, but I don't actually know. I don't know what the industrial mixing was when you had people who were 13 working, right? But I think it's probably true. But so if you can run from the very, very tail, the boomers through to now, my son, who's 24, just started working in professional services, right? And I'm thinking, that's a heck of a span. It's conceivable his grandparents could be working. Right. So in that environment, I think the bar is higher for helping people understand why what they're doing matters, how it fits in. So just classic sense making. And email doesn't answer questions on its own. AI, for all of its brilliance, generative AI, is still a nonsense in, nonsense out matter. You do actually have to curate that LLM. You have to make sure
Yeah.
that what's in there, right? And so the human condition of saying this person who's responsible for me can actually help my experience at work be better, can actually help me understand how I can do my job, can actually help me know how I'm doing. I mean, just imagine this for a second. Many of us will have sent our children to like music lessons. Could you imagine paying for music lessons where the person doesn't talk to your kid? I mean, that's for many people, when they have these massive spans, they go to work and it's a no news is good news situation where they think they're not supposed to hear from the boss. And so, for me, first and foremost was to actually help employees make sense of their job and know how they're doing, right? More than anything. I mean, why else do you need distilled leadership? In large part because the memos, no matter how perfectly crafted they are, still don't land with everybody. They're often written for other executives to read, and then they go down through the organization. At some point, you need to know that a cascade of information and sense making is occurring. That's not self-serve. That is an interpersonal experience, where an announcement comes and you go to ask. And so, particularly in times of dramatic change and dramatic concern about what does this mean for me, you actually do need someone who is trusted. And last I checked, the website is not a trusted entity. You do need a person.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not until it gets corpus, right? I mean, maybe when it says Danger Will Robinson, it's okay, but not quite yet.
Yeah, no, that's a deep response, and it's building on the previous one that we all think of leadership, but eventually it is the middle management which makes the difference. And now you peel the onion a little bit that why it is so crucial. So just digging a little deeper into this, as you did your research for the book, and obviously in your career as well, right? So book is like a milestone in the career, right?
Yes.
It's
Well,
not,
it was kind of like the swan song moment at the end of I spent 22 years and 10 months at McKinsey, August of 2000 to end of May, 2023. By most accounts, that's an epoch. I was leaving with the dinosaurs, right? I was walking out. My arms got smaller as I walked out. So I knew I wanted to do something signature on the way out, and it had been about 25 years since The War for Talent had been written. And so you're right. I mean, we have a wonderful publisher. Harvard's been amazing. And I had two amazing colleagues who allowed me to pontificate and outline all the chapters about how I'd like them to be. And then Brian Hancock has the most wonderful stories and has served these amazing mega institutions with like employees counted in the millions. And Emily is just brilliant at problem solving and has really found a way to say, hey, here's where we need a McKinsey tool. Here's where we need a really good way of thinking about it. And then just drove the process of going from me running my Yap with, Phyllis Corky, the lady who helped us with writing, to actually getting to a book. So I'm very, very fortunate that was the end of the run. But all of us in our own client service kept on stumbling over this idea of we've largely mistreated, and I say we like the proverbial we, largely mistreated this group of leaders. And at the moment when we need them the most, we've not created the conditions where it's likely they'll be able to do it. I mean, think about how many people who are in management roles in the middle who are really just individual contributors. And because of some kind of like hay point system or job grading system couldn't be paid anymore. And so they called them a manager. That's not actually where they get their purpose from. There are many people who just want to do their job and they want to do their job really well. They don't want to deal with management. And so we've created the perfect storm of at the moment when we need a resource most, it's the least able to provide it,
Yeah, I can see that. So building on that, I think, Bill, I would, in your entire or the last few years, once you knew that you would like to write something like this, and you had two wonderful co-authors, what were the big challenges that you found that mid-career or middle management professionals were facing? The big rocks, as they would say, which needed some attention. What did you see?
For many people, And I think we collected data for, I don't know, like 800 or 1,000 of them or something about where they spend their time, what they think where they spend their time, period, what they think they should be spending their time on, and what they're rewarded for spending. The thing that was amazing was how much almost all of us have become complicit in the idea that middle managers are there to feed the beast, do administrivia, bureaucracy, go to meetings that are just standing meetings. And when you start I remember once I was serving a refiner and we were working on maintenance and making sure that the refinery stayed running, right? And things had to be fixed. And in most people who are listening to this will know, most maintenance operations have like a start in the morning, like say 6 a.m. and then a second start maybe at like noon. So, but when they go out, you got to know that they're all working on the right things. They have the parts they need, the plans they need, et cetera. And I go, hey, we're going to meet at first start tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. And the guy said, well, no, that's when my call with Houston is. What do you mean? I mean, like, you are not making gasoline if this thing's not getting fixed. Shouldn't we be there? Well, but that's the morning stand-up call. And this was a well-intended, earnest person who thought that they didn't have any agency to say, no, actually, that's my job. And so I use that as an example of we've conditioned people to believe that the facilitation and the way station of process is their job, as opposed to having time on talent. Their job, literally, being in the middle, is to be focused on the talent doing the work, not the paper documenting the work. And that to me is, we've made just generations of people who think that has to come first, as evidenced by the data we got. The vast majority of them felt like planning, and it's not even like real strategic planning. Not really. I mean, we like the idea of strategic planning because it sounds important. If you're in the middle, you're not doing strategic planning. At best, you're doing tactical planning, and you're probably just doing operational planning. And in many cases, it's buried in PowerPoint that no one was intended to read in landscape anyway, right? But I mean, don't get me wrong. I like drawing charts. I just think when it's all words on the chart, we were probably doing okay with the written word in vertical. But I digress. The whole point is we've gotten people to spend time on things that are supposed to have like made work easier. I think it's just made work more proliferate.
Yeah. So and that rings a bell because for the longest time we also debated, and I've spoken at some sessions, and we keep discussing this, that if leadership is overhyped, strategy is even more overhyped.
Yeah.
So, not everybody needs to be in a strategy session. Not everything is strategy. And Kenichi Ome said that, there are only 2-3 types of strategy. You have cost, you have service, that's it. And the rest of it is planning. You plan to deliver it. So I'm glad you saw it this way.
For sure. I mean, it's strange coming from a strategy house, right? But I mean, McKinsey's signature practices are strategy and org, right? And even my new firm, Modern Executive, it's this idea of, hey, the plan is great, but at some point you're asking the question, not is the plan good enough? You're asking the question, are the people good enough? And do we have enough of them? I mean, that's, you and I in our lifetime have known more time of basically free money, right? Who actually works weighted average cost of capital anymore? No one, right? Because there's plenty of financial capital. Human capital is the gating constraint. The identification, collection, training, deployment, motivation, and retention of human capital. Who else does that but the people in the middle? I mean, when you see the run of attrition, they're running away from a boss. They are not running away from a company, right? And that to me was like, the whole great attrition, great attraction stuff, which, my buddy Aaron DeSmet and I led with, Bonnie Dolling and Brian Hancock and others at McKinsey. It just kept on coming back again and again. And we started seeing the data of there's always 40% of the people who want to leave. And 2/3 of those are saying, I'll leave without another job. When you start seeing that quarter after quarter after quarter after, the JOLTS data, was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. In the US at the height of it, they were, somewhere on the order of 10 million jobs short, 10 million people short, sorry, for the number of openings. Put that in perspective, in the financial crisis, just under 8 million jobs were taken out. So you'd have to lose all the jobs of the financial crisis and you'd still be short. I mean, that's how it had gotten, because it's just a general sense of malaise and dissatisfaction with the condition at work. That's why you saw people becoming entrepreneurs, right? And so for me, it was like this perfect tempest of, if we're going to change this, we have to start with the people that we've been given the privilege. And I think this is a mindset problem. Anybody in a leadership role, I think, should be viewing it as privilege, right? Not pressure. You have the opportunity to lead other human beings in the thing they spend more time at than they even spend with their family.
Yeah, and it's rightly said. I think it was Joseph Jiran who said that leadership is a gift, by the people who choose or allow you to lead. So yeah, just moving and we have some questions, Bill. What we'll do is
If
that we'll
if
take.
any of those questions have to do with the plaid nature of my shirt, I'm sorry. Okay, I was just threw on what was
No,
available.
I will ban those questions. Don't worry. But it's also a reminder to other people who might be thinking of a question and are thinking, should you ask, should you not? This is your chance. If you don't ask today, you are not getting to talk to Bill for some time. He has a busy schedule. We've been able to catch him, so shoot your questions. Okay, I had one before we get a little deeper. So obviously, everybody knows that a book is not enough to change the situation, right? So book is a trigger, a catalyst. It will probably remind people, senior people, board people, people in boardrooms that, hey, we ignored these people. We need to do something, right? So uh, and any author, and I've spoken to many, and I'm sure you also think that way, that it would have done really well if it changes how some boards think. But that's the other side. As a middle manager or mid career person, and I'm speaking on behalf of several, what can I do to make sure that I make my role, my job, and many people like me, our jobs more meaningful, more
Yeah.
useful? What can I do, and not just depend on the board and Bill Schaninger to rescue us?
Look, it's a great question, because the jobs have been made in many cases either undoable or unattractive. That's for sure. I mean, I think I'd start in two areas. One, I would revisit just good old fashioned what's in the job. And so look at all the time. Let's actually just say, okay, this role, how does it directly contribute to value or risk mitigation, one or the other? If you happen to be working like in a company that services nuclear plants, there's not a ton of upside there in growth, but there's a massive amount of downside, right? Because of the installed base. Both those are really important. The beauty of like value is like it's an absolute value, and it can be up or down. So one, look at what matters about the job, right? Where does the value come from? And then look at the things you absolutely have to do. Classic jobs to be done kind of thinking. And then look at all the other stuff you're asked to do. I think a huge portion of it to make middle management roles doable is the eradication of nonsense. Just because the incumbent before you did it doesn't mean you have to do it. If it's a standing meeting, it's probably a good idea that you don't need that meeting. Right? If that standing meeting is, even if it's necessary, if it's not matched to the cadence of work or the cycle of work, also probably not necessary. I mean, just think about like some things are quarterly. Great. All right, let's, how much do we get to stagger that? Maybe 2 meetings before the end of the quarter? Super. Weekly meetings for something that occurs quarterly? Probably not necessary. I mean, so some of that is just clean up the role. Just the sheer amount of administrivia and bureaucracy, in many cases driven by the rest of the company. Like if you're in a support function, why does everybody get their own version of the report? It's kind of dumb, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of variability, go for homogeneity, standardize when it comes out. I mean, just think about all the things we've done over the years, particularly in support functions, that were in pursuit of standardization, routinization, right? Tech enablement where you can. All those things are wonderful. Yet we allow to creep back in all these workarounds and all these modifications that end up either saying, you're going to do self-serve for the regular stuff, but we're going to feed this beast and like special reporting is an indulgence. And yet so many people in the middle are forced to do it. So clean up the job, get to what really matters. Second thing, classic role clarity. And this comes in on the job level or on the task level. If someone asks you something to do, you should be able to demand, what exactly are you asking? What does great look like? By when? With whom do I have to work? What can I decide on my own? What do I have to come back to you on? If someone can't give you that information, you shouldn't do the job. Because that's when you find out that they also asked 4 other people and they're playing a strange little Hunger Games thing because they don't want to really say that, oh, we're not sure what the answer is. I mean, how maddening is it when you realize that like 3 different groups are doing something kind of the same, but not exactly the same? That's self-indulgent to an ADHD boss, right? It's not a good use of people's time, and it's demoralizing. You turn on work and you spend time on it, maybe working at night or something else, only to discover it really wasn't valued enough to be set up properly.
Yeah, I think first point that you said, Bill, and my regular day job as I'm a quality management professional, so I've done all this business process reengineering and process stuff. And
well, I wouldn't say re-engineering, all right, but there you go.
yes.
But yeah, I mean, stripping old school good lean principles. You don't need a lean team. It's just get rid of the stuff that doesn't need to be there anymore.
And very often, Bill, what we find even today, and for a long time I was a consultant, so I used to review processes for clients, and I would ask, who's reading this report? And one thing comes to mind very big. There is this person. I won't name the company or anything, but there's this person who's sending a report every day, Bill, and this is the 8th year of the sending. 8th year, every day, at the end of the day. The reason was that this person was away on leave, and we had to find a person to replace him. So I asked, what is this person doing that we need a replacement? The person is entitled for a leave. Let him go enjoy his break and come back. No. This is a very important report. At the end of the day, has to go. Okay, so who's getting that report? We could not, for our life, find who was getting that report.
Oh, come on.
Nobody in the company, and this was in Melbourne. So many people who know me can guess the company, but could not just find who was actually reading the report. And this was taking him 4 to 6 hours every day to prepare the report. For 8 years, nobody had touched that. So I said, I was in charge. I said, okay, for 1 month, we will not send this report. Let's see who comes back.
Yeah.
We are waiting. It's been 8 more years since then. Nobody has come back.
Yeah.
So we get what you mean, and I think for middle managers, this is a question I wish that this person would have asked instead of me asking that question, and that's exactly what you are sharing. So thanks for that, Bill. We have some questions, so let me quickly bring in some questions. Priyanka has a question. So what will happen, Bill? You can see the question on the screen as well, but I'll read it out for everybody. Priyanka is asking, I have an important question. The impact of leadership coaching or executive coaching, does it impact middle management? Do you see this obviously executive coaching is big these days. Do you see any impact on middle man or the need?
Yeah. The fact that I joined a firm that just recently here that offers coaching, I'm trying to calibrate my response. In general, people do better when they have a sense of how they're doing and having an opportunity to walk through on improvement. I mean, just because you're little, you get coaching when you go hit a baseball for the first time or playing a violin for the first time, or singing for the first time. Oh, okay. As long as you're teaching a kid how to swim, it is coaching at its core. Trying to teach something, observing, giving feedback, practice, repeat. Somewhere along the line, I think many of us are just convinced, oh, well, we don't need coaching anymore because, we know what the job is. I think most people would do benefit with coaching. That said, it's non-obvious that it always has to come from a coach. I would argue coaching is something that your direct manager should be doing. Right? A couple of years ago, we wrote an article with colleagues that said, putting the manager back in performance management. I got to tell you, I think the most important part about performance management is not the forms. It's not the process. It's not the end of year exercise to figure out the comp number. I think it's the weekly or fortnightly conversations about what you said you were working on. How did it go? What can we do different? Rinse, wash, and repeat. And so could you imagine going to a cricket match and they don't keep score? You know who's keeping score? People in the stands are keeping score. whether
Yeah.
you put it up or not. I threw crooked in for you because I wanted to show that I was worldly for my time in London. I prefer the 1 day, not the 5 day, but yes, I do enjoy it. But yeah, I mean, everyone keeps score. Even if you're not keeping score, everyone keeps score. You want to know how you're
Yeah.
doing. It's part of the human condition. Coaching at its core should happen in the context of the job. Now, coaches and the discipline of coaches. There, I break that in the two camps. One is quite targeted coaching on a specific behavior or skill, like because you've had a change in your job or you're just struggling with a particular aspect of your job. Then I think it can be quite good, so long as it's time bound and it's focused on either a result or the exhibition of a behavior that you've
Yeah.
internalized and made a habit. The other kind of coaching probably shouldn't be called coaching; it should be called therapy. And one of the things I sometimes get anxious about is there are a fair number of folks who hang a shingle and call themselves coaches who are not therapists, but are dabbling in therapy, right? Stuff around, identity, stuff around the things that gets to the core of your being, triggering points that trigger for trauma, or because maybe you have a high ACEs score. I think therapy is quite useful for many people who've been through 40 years of life. Most people have had some trauma and then it bleeds over into work.
Yeah.
No problem. So I think psychotherapy is quite good. Seeking out help, quite good. If you need coaching on a specific thing, time bound, quite good. But most coaching, like in the largest sense, it's your boss's job. And if they don't have time to do that, then we have their job set up wrong.
I think the last bit hit the nail, or the what I was looking for as well. I have for long been saying that managing people means you are going to coach them to get better,
Yep.
and I don't know of any other definition. So what else are we doing? As a people manager, if you are helping somebody to do their job, you're also helping them to do it better.
You'd
Uh,
think, right? I mean, otherwise, what are you doing then, right? I mean, that's
yeah. What else are you doing? I mean, like you said earlier, you are pushing paper because you are then a postman between the senior leadership and the people who are actually doing
yep,
the job. You are not translating this thing. And the other thing I think, Bill, which comes up quite often is that this pressure bit. So a lot of managers today, and not today, for many years, and at least in the coaching work that I do, I see that they transfer the pressure that they receive. My view is that we
yes,
should be able to absorb the pressure. If I transfer the pressure, then what did I do? There was no role.
right,
I
right.
was not needed. Yeah. So some of
Well,
this.
it's
So
clear what your bias is. You know what you're describing, right? You have an internalized bias that you should not be an amplifier. Some people are amplifiers because it's how they handle their own sense of pressure, and they don't have an outlet for it. They don't have
yeah,
people who feel pressure without feeling agency to do something about it have to move that anxiety somewhere. But it's always going to be anger or anxiety, one or the other. You could say the joke about men is all things end back in elation or anger. So one or the other. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying I might know something about it. But if you have someone who doesn't feel like they have the tools or agency to do something about the pressure coming on, for some of them, through their own either self-preservation or indulgence, they will flow it through. Like the people who take a request and turning it into an emergency for their team, it's kind of it's obnoxious, right? But there are people how they respond to it, right?
and a lot of people draw their power from that, creating that urgency.
Absolutely right.
So,
Particularly the gatekeepers. The people think like,
yeah,
I alone am the conduit to power, therefore I have power. I mean, so much bad behavior that's maligned middle managers. You can also almost always look at the psychological deficit of the person in the role. There's almost always someone there who feels disempowered, undervalued, feels like, it's like the people who are knowledge hoarders. I won't actually connect you to these people because my power comes from being the person who has the knowledge.
yeah.
It's strange. It creates critical man, critical woman problems. It creates silos. It creates mistrust. I mean, so much of that is, hey, you should be rewarded for being a connector, not a constrainer,
And just checking a couple of questions. So one from Manish Shashi. Bill, do you think middle managers need to be hired laterally or needs to be promoted someone organically. So hired laterally as in
Yeah,
coming from another
yeah,
organization and within the organization. So which one in your experience is better,
yeah,
or any view here?
yeah. Well, I mean, look, the unhelpful answer is both. But from a proportion standpoint, I like the idea of lateral moves within a company. One for a person feeling own renewal, better
Hmm.
knowledge of how the whole place works. So I like internal mobility a lot. I think it's good for the employee. It gives them a lot more degrees of freedom for what they might do. We know from the human capital work we had done a few years ago when I was still at McKinsey that mobility in all its forms, particularly where you're really taking what you've learned and then extending it, can like double your expected lifetime earnings just by being so. It's really a big part of the value proposition for employees. I would say in general, I prefer to hire entry level. It helps you on the DE&I front. It helps you on the sourcing front. It gives you a bigger pool. You get it. Let people have a chance and say, "Can you make it or not?" Right. I like moving people around inside and then promote. I do like, in general, promoting from within. To the extent to which that you're going into the strategy demands a set of skills that you don't currently have, well, then you probably need to do it. But hiring outside, I mean, but being thoughtful about how you indoctrinate them, right? And thoughtful about how you onboard them. But yeah, in general, I do like promoting from within with targeted hiring from the outside, assuming, it's a big assumption, that you invest appropriately in onboarding, you invest appropriately in training, and maybe most importantly, you have enough slack in the system that people can go to training, people can take time off, people can get sick, they can deal with their families, they can deal with life, and you can still keep it running. I think somewhere along the line, we allowed the former accountants that became finance people to bludgeon us with the same approach they've done to working capital on money, to taking that approach to human capital. That's a grievous mistake. We over COVID, we normalized the idea that we would run threadbare, and run at a 70-75% complement, and thought that was sustainable. At some point, the human machine breaks down.
It does, and we have so many examples, Bill. In I run a large global team as well, and so many examples in our organization and other organizations that what people could accomplish during a crisis called COVID, they were no longer capable of sustaining it because that
Yeah,
emotional investment was gone. We were a team when you are in that crisis. When the crisis
yeah,
eases off, you are a normal organization, and suddenly that peak performance is no longer possible.
yeah.
And this is like in a basketball game or a baseball game when you're down and probably on the brink. People do come together and play above their or punch above their weight, and
Are you
that's no
reminding
longer
me that the
possible.
Phillies lost in the ninth inning last night? Is that what's happening right now?
I don't follow that much, but I know what you're saying.
The point you're making about it breaking down, super interesting. In the United States, we've recently had a big push and looking into our special forces units. It's called SOCOM,
Hmm,
right? Special
hmm,
Operations Command. It used to be the Navy SEALs, as an example, or most of the special forces, they would have a period of deployment, which was really intense training, period of deployment, and then they'd have a period of rest
yeah.
for a long time, quite specialized in the Navy SEALs boats, but specialized units. During the course of our 20 years of war in two countries at the same time, many of those units got directed towards desert warfare or that sort of thing. So they didn't have people who did drug interdiction or were specialists, in South America, or specialists, say, in, the polar regions or the Arctic regions, whatever. Everybody was like, you're all going to do the desert thing. They also started being deployed much more rapidly, less training,
Hmm.
pulling of their leaders, particularly, their non-commissioned officer leaders, out for doing other things. They came into training late. And so the cycle time of on and off of, performance and rest and recuperation was broken. And they started being given jobs that weren't as special, but where we didn't trust necessarily that the regular force could do it. I bring that up just because I think in work, the wonderful parallel is you find a few people who do a really good job. You don't reward them and give them a break. You load them up with more. We
Hmm.
are wired as leaders, because we want to be seen as being successful and we run a good team, to wear out the best assets we have. So rather than spending the time that we need to either pick someone else, bring someone new in and train them up, We keep going to the well and just grind it down. And that to me, that's sort of eat your own kind of orientation. Maybe because that's what happened to the leader themselves. And so they think it's like, well, this is how I learned. Boy, we've got to find a way to break that cycle, because there is no longer an emotional stigma to leaving jobs. People leave now quite easily. You will just you will see people leaving out the door. The problem of COVID on many fronts, beyond the loss of human life, was people figured out there's no longer a stigma to raise your hand and go, I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. So if leaders do not change their behavior on how they use counterintuitively their best employees, they will continue to lose those best employees.
Yeah, that's a deep observation, and this is a very global observation, Bill, because
I think so. I think so.
Most of my team is in India, but I do have people across the globe in other countries as well, and I found this particular thing quite common. And people were actually worried when I said that, okay, people who were involved in making sure that we were supporting teams during the COVID period. I said, okay, now you have had a very tough 18 months. You change a role and cool off a little bit. I saw some people were worried, some people welcomed it, and all that kind of mix. But we are trying to normalize that, and I'm glad you brought this up. So we are coming towards the end of the conversation, Bill. So I'll take a couple of more questions, and there's a detailed question from Anu Rathor. So she's asking, we see a lot of middle managers who promoted to middle management role due to their performance in the tech roles or in their previous individual contributor roles, which is fine, commendable. However, there is a gaping lack of structured leadership training for them. What are your thoughts on coaching and training them early on, and how do you suggest we have this conversation with organization? I think from what I understand also, Bill, and even though she's specified, many individual contributors become managers because they did well in a role which was different. What do we do with them? Did you see this as an issue, and what would you suggest?
I mean, look, it's an issue that's been around since like the dawn of the organization. We assume that just because, in the classic master and apprentice model, training and leadership was built into the master's role because he had an obligation to train the apprentice. I mean, think about the classic guild orientation, right? It's where it comes from. The guilds were set up that the person who knew it the best over a long period of time would train and grow and develop the next generation of masters through long-term apprenticeship. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, except that that's not how it's happening in corporate world. You have individual contributors in many cases who just want to be paid more because they're really good at what they do, and they begrudgingly accept the administrivia, the bureaucracy, the pain in the butt of difficult employees. I think the organizations that get it right are the people who keep them in role, promote them in role, pay them more in role, with the expectation that you better be really good at what you're doing. Backsliding's not it, right? Otherwise, you reset the role down to where it was. For so many individuals, their purpose is not the leadership component of it. Their purpose is the craft component of it. And we take them out of it. We continually insist. Think about local schools and an incredibly good principal. There may be no more important middle management role than the principal of a school. And yet for those people, for them to make any money or feel like they're continually progressing forward, they get moved into some like 2 or 3 levels down from the superintendent administrative role. What happened to the days of just good single noble purpose and where you can do the best? Reward people for their impact, not the hay point system value of their role. That's a long way of saying I think individual contributors, when they're really good and want to do it, should stay in their role and figure out a way to reward them appropriately.
And in any case, the worst thing would be to make them a manager because just for the wrong reasons, right? So,
I mean, you have coaches, professional sports, where the coach makes less than the players. You know what I mean? Right? And you're not going to immediately assume, oh, you're the world's best player. So now you have to. In fact, we have some I would say you have more examples of players being horrible coaches than good ones,
a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot, right? Because the skill set's so unbelievably different. I mean, that's why the Peter Principle was named, how many decades ago. But the basics of it are the same. Why would you think that a job that's all about this skill, that to this new job that's actually more about these other skills, why would you assume that you can do that with no proper training? Now, the question talked about training. The other thing is we've been on a 25, 30-year run on the eradication of training and learning budgets, right? We seem to become enthralled with the idea that everything can be done self-directed and remotely. The whole point about large training events, the training actually was secondary. It was creating a cadre of people who wanted to be who wanted to be part of the organization, and you happen to learn something. And oh, by the way, you made a network of people that you can ring up and go, hey, how do we do this again? What is that? Like, you infuse the fabric of the place, the idea that you were there to help each other. The more we keep making everything remote and everything self-directed, you're making vendors. You're not making employees, right? You're creating people who think about me, not we, with all the isolation. I think I really worry that globally, first was the years of labor arbitrage, initially in India, in your country, then in other countries, where it was like, oh, we can go somewhere and set up and we can pay less. Great. But, when those people start doing well, they're actually going to want to enjoy the trappings of a middle-class life and actually not work like that anymore. And so we bounce around to the next place. Well, now we've done it on the individual level with, work remotely, work for yourself. Hey, so like we're backing our way into the gig economy, which is just a different version of labor arbitrage, right? And it's just, what happened to the power of we and being part of something? And I think for me, when we talk about bringing it back to middle managers, the signature task they have to do is help people see that suborning their needs momentarily contributes in a much larger way to something that matters more.
I actually wrote down this, we are making vendors and not employees. So, that's such a powerful summary, what we do. And I see this every day because I'm also at the other end of the arbitrage that you mentioned. And while I run a global team, I also know that I face this every day, and all my friends, colleagues also face this every day.
Can we stick with the thing? I'm curious about your experience about something. When I had a role where I was responsible for the diagnostics team, just because I'd written this tool called the Org Health Index, and we had a big team in Gurgaon. I think maybe over the course of 15 years, I probably went there 3 times. And I always felt incredibly guilty that there was a large group of people there that ostensibly were under my charge that I wasn't paying attention to. Yeah. And I often felt like, is it just even appropriate for me to have these people notionally under my charge, because they're just not getting enough of me? And I wondered when we you think about global talent pools, should there be a demand or an expectation of meaningful local presence of leadership, someone you can actually go talk to? And I don't know how others have cracked this problem. Now, I always felt like over the course of my nearly 23 years, I never had a handle on labor in Asia, either near or Far East. I never felt like I had a good handle on it.
So a lot has changed, actually, Bill. What has happened also is that large professional services and IT companies have realized that this is a problem, and you can't solve this problem by flying down every 6 months for half a day. So of course, for some time it was people tried to solve it with town halls and all that stuff, and it doesn't work beyond a point. Of course, it does work to I know how Bill looks and I know how he speaks. I know some of his jokes, and that's a connect. But like you said, so companies started hiring people in India, people who had worked in overseas or had that kind of a both world experience, and a lot of that happened. Or people like me who've been in the same space and have seen global teams, and therefore my role could be in Bangalore, but I could run a global team. That has happened a lot now, and probably that's helping us survive as an industry.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this could go to any country, people sitting in their house, basement, garages, and we pretend that that's a company. Not a company.
vendors by another name. You know what you just said, by the way, our very first topic about the idea of sense making. You had done both, and you've gone in. I mean, I think the classics. I think there's something around old school location Do you want to be close to customers? Do you want to be close to employees? Do you want to be close to competitors because you're creating an ecosystem? There's some value in still looking at, I want to be where the people are, right?
There
If
is
we
a
really
lot
are
of,
going to be a we, you know what I mean? And I think what you were describing is recognizing the value of that. I want to be where the people
and,
are.
and companies have recognized that. And of course, there is a limit to how much you can invest, but they are trying to solve this by having people who've seen both the worlds, and
Yep.
therefore, it's a little easier, hopefully. But fantastic point, and thanks, Bill, for the question. I don't usually get asked questions during my show, but
Well,
but
I'm helping you expand your horizons. How about that?
thanks a lot for that coaching moment as well. We have one quick question, and then we'll wrap up from Shaili Sharma. How to politely ask for training if that's available in the org, or
Yeah.
exhibit your managerial skill and wait. Ah, good one.
I think it's a really good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have two thoughts. I mean, I think you have to be clear in your own mind. How is this training the answer? Right? Because
Hmm.
sometimes there's learning. If you want to do learning, think about learning is just the idea of, do I understand this thing? Training is often the thing of practicing that thing, right? Like young engineering students go to school for knowledge. They learn about engineering. They are not engineers, right? And then they have
Yeah.
to go actually do some apprenticeship, right? They do an internship. I think there's a reason why the professional engineer
Yeah.
licensure requires hours, because you actually have to do the job. So I think at
Yeah.
first you should ask yourself, are you doing learning or are you doing training? And I'm not trying to split a fine hair. It's just like, I think, narrow in what it is. The first one, you probably still will not see an improvement in performance. The second one, you most certainly should. So then
Hmm.
articulate the case for it and saying, hey, I need to learn about this, because then I want to be able to go apply it on these projects or that. But I actually have to learn about this first. And then ask yourself, is this on the company's dime or is it on your time? For many people, what they do in nights on weekends is about investing in themselves. They may or may not have the company do it. But I do think when it comes to training in particular, something where you'll be applying it at work on the company's behalf, that should be paid for. Learning, maybe not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I think I'm a big proponent for training is more just in time. You want to
For
improve on
sure.
something, some skill, you just do it and get better. Um, so, Bill, we are almost at the end of the thing. Uh, any quick words on the book, and if you have a
Yeah,
copy
well,
around,
I brought a copy. There we go. That's the picture. Let's see if I can make it. Power to the middle. I can
yeah.
assure you, I was surprised at how much time and effort was spent. The color and shading of this circle, that was at least a dozen emails. It was remarkable. Thankfully, the people at Harvard
So
have people who do that.
it has come out really well, and I'm one third into it, so I don't have the copy handy yet, but I'm one third into it, and I'm glad that somebody wrote it.
Well, thank you. You're really kind, and I enjoyed this. I will tell you, for those that like to listen to books,
Hmm.
I narrated this one.
Oh,
So
on
yeah,
Audible.
yeah.
Okay.
The last book 5 years ago, my colleague and buddy Scott Keller and I wrote Beyond Performance 2.0, and that was like on changing how you run the place. It was a change management book,
Mm.
and I so disliked the voice on
Mm.
Audible that on this contract I insisted we put in a right of first refusal clause, going, Leo, you better show up with Morgan Freeman, or I'm going to do it. Right? It's like, and it was it was way harder than I thought. It was really, it was like 12 hours of recording to get to the 5 hours of the book. But I think it turned out okay. And at the worst case, if you're having a hard time going to sleep, you can listen to me. Then I'll help you.
We get what you mean, but thanks a lot. I'm an Audible fan, so I'll get to this book very quickly. But what else are you reading, Bill? What is on Bill's bookshelf these days?
Well, okay. I've been, because I was a PhD student and I just
Oh.
started in the world of, I'm Dr. Schaninger is like, from like 2000 now, 2002 actually. And, I used to read a ton of journal articles. So I find myself now on the feeds. I'm still reading a ton of economic analysis. I just like
Hmm.
it, right? I still do enjoy Paul Krugman, right? And enjoy that quite a bit. I've been fascinated by a lot of the intergenerational stuff, reading a lot about that. I've contributed. I had a platform for a long time at McKinsey where I could research kind of whatever I wanted,
Mm.
around people and stuff. So I read a lot of that. And, I don't read very much for straight pleasure. I read very little fiction. Very little. I think I'm kind of boring. If I make an acknowledgement, just because what I do for fun is I'm at the perfect age where I've always had access to video games. Right, like Pong. I still play video games. I really do. It's the mind, like games like the sports games like FIFA or Madden or something else through EA. Behind that is a massive algorithm for talent. All the ratings and things, and working in your head, how much can I afford? And what's the great combination? I love that. I will likely spend more time being a general manager than I will playing the game.
I think ours is the last generation, Bill, that is still doing that. Maybe the next one may have completely different views. But look, we didn't realize we are up 1 hour into the
wonderful. This is really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thank you very much for doing this, Bill. Because most of my events, of course, my audience knows that we try and do this on Saturday morning, but that would have been really past midnight for you. So I'm glad we could make this happen. And what we will do is,
right. I forgot that we went off schedule for you to do this. Thank you so much for accommodating it. It really made it a lot easier for me to participate.
No, anytime. And I do have, I've had guests from the West Coast as well. So obviously the Saturday morning doesn't work for most of them. So thank you for doing that. And to my audience, do check out Bill's page on LinkedIn. Some fantastic content that he shares. And if you are considering your next read, this is a book, fantastic book, The Power of to the Middle. It will change how you think about middle management. And hopefully some respect and dignity will be back for the middle management, which is the whole thing that I try and do. With that, I'll let you go, Bill. And thank you, lovely audience.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.